seems odd to me that it's even there. But these are things you can point out to them. If they're going to be the box checkers, you got to start turning that on them and say, look, not everything on this makes sense. You're going to either start getting rid of stuff, or I'm going to make you look silly.
So they're not actually enforcing that, but it's just on the books.
Is on the books.
Okay, so you're basically going to, you know, give them the ultimatum, like, hey, you either enforce this or remove it.
Sure, that would be that's the direction I'm going.
Welcome to the Libertarian Leadership Academy podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pickens, and today we have an elected city council member from Ephrata, Washington, who is doing some amazing things out there, or at least trying to do some amazing things. He's currently being blocked by some of his other city council members. He's also a local business person in Ephrata. His name is Matt Moore. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I got forwarded an email from Whitney Davis, who's our political director, saying, hey, we have a Libertarian City Council member who's looking to run some initiatives and get some information on some initiatives. And I gave you a call and you told me that you were looking to run initiatives because some of your local city council members were not letting you get rid of bad ordinances. Is that kind of summing it up?
That's largely true. I think that, you know, in the state of Washington, we have a pretty robust initiative system, but it's mostly on statewide stuff. I don't see stuff come across the board very much on city initiatives. And I don't have things that are frankly very major. I've always tried to start out a little bit slow and pick on things that really no one should have as a sacred cow. But that's harder than one would think, you know, to get things changed. Government does not serve anything but itself most of the time.
Sure. Now, you're obviously looking to get rid of some of these ordinances that are currently in place, and your colleagues on the city council are not really on board. Does the root of this, does this go back to what you feel your role is as a city council member compared to what they feel their role is?
I don't think it's a big difference in terms of roles. I think there's a little bit of this as a generational thing, but you do have a large collection of people on there that are just lifelong government. Ephrata is a county seat, so there's a little bit of a flavor of that culturally, even though we're a small eastern Washington, you know, most people think of it as a red area. It's still a lot of, for lack of a better term, box checkers. There's people that you can make the most rational argument in the world for why this is a silly law, or this is a needless tax, or this really benefits no one. And they'll smile and agree with you. At the end of the day, they still come back and say, well, you know, got to obey the law. Law's the law. But no. You're not. If no one needs this affects no one, or it's in many cases counterproductive. Like there was something as simple as just digging through the books trying to find ideas. There's a pinball machine tax in Ephrata. There's a $5 pinball machine tax, which I'm sure dates back to, you know, eras when you had arcades or you had some of these pizza parlors with lots of stuff. And, you know, someone along the lines was determined, well, this is obviously, they're just probably pocketing all those quarters. We really need to have some sort of a means to.
We need our cut.
Yeah, we got to have the cash flow from that sweet cherry of pinball machine money. So pinball machines, pool tables, some of those things you have in a bar. Well, you point out to them how little revenue actually gets generated, and it's not worth the time, first and foremost. But you talk to some of the people, the ones that actually do pay it, they get a separate bill in the mail. They're like almost required. You can't like auto pay that. You can't. There's a guy literally has to write a check for like $8 every single month just for this silly tax. There's just a lot of things that are needlessly hassling, not really any significant benefit to anyone. Those are just, you know, little examples, but there's other stuff like the state of Washington used to have hard alcohol could only be sold from liquor stores. Mm-hmm. And a few years ago, we got rid of that. And now you have Walmarts and Safeways and stuff that sell hard liquor. Ephrata still has, if you dig deep enough into the books, I think they're generally called like a blue light law, where liquor can't be sold until 2:00 on Sunday or can't be sold past whatever. You know, some of these stores are open 24/7. Safe, Walmart, it's, you know, they're not going to, you know, I'm sure if we forced them to, we could, but they've been selling regardless. So point being that obviously we should get rid of the law. It's no longer even close to the flavor of the rest of the Washington State Code. But you bringing up stuff like that, you're almost nervous because you're like, well, my goal here isn't to go off and hassle Walmart Safeway. My goal is to get rid of something that clearly the state of the, you know, has largely gotten rid of. Or if you really want to do this, go do this, but no one is complying with it. But it's,
sure,
you know, time to have a conversation about it.
Go ahead.
Oh, some of the more relevant stuff for smaller towns, like Ephrata was built, there was an Air Force base at Moses Lake and another one over here, a smaller Army Air Force base. And the whole town largely has an infrastructure from the 1940s and 50s.
Mhm.
So most of that is no longer obviously even close to modern building codes. But there's a lot of restrictions on stuff when people are doing remodels and things of that nature that come into play because like if you spend more than 50% of the value of a building, which many of the buildings in smaller towns are fairly cheap, you have to comply as though you're building from scratch in a lot of cases. Well, that's hard enough when you're having to deal with federal stuff like ADA compliance or
Mhm.
fire codes, things of that nature. But there was a bunch of other stuff on there that there was clearly cut and paste from more modern cities. We have a tendency to just grab, well, we'll use the code from wherever, and some of the stuff that tags along with that is things like parking requirements. Well, you picture like some of those 1950s main streets where all the buildings side by side stacked together right along, the main
Mhm.
street. There's no parking to be had. You can't conjure up parking from thin air.
Sure.
It's a huge detriment to some of these people that are trying to keep their buildings occupied. But the second they go out of compliance or they have an empty building for a significant period of time or a change of use, you would have to comply with everything in those you're building from scratch. Well, that's one that can't be complied with, no matter how much money you're putting into it. You can put money into fire code if you want to, but you can't make parking out of thin air. So that's one
Sure.
that I pretty relevant. I've really worked hard. I've never encountered a significant argument against it, but it never seems to go anywhere as far as trying to get things passed. So my goal was to try and say, look, there's a nuclear option here. I'm not looking to use it, but I can just start throwing stuff out there for initiatives if we want. If you guys are interested in this sort of stuff, nobody wants a pinball machine tax. So anyway, stuff like that.
Sure. Now let's go back to the reason why. Obviously, you got elected to city council. Did you run on what you're doing now?
I didn't, and I didn't have an axe to grind. I've always been someone that's enjoyed public service. I enjoy being involved and connected. I'm many generations deep in the town here and have a family and a business here now. So I'm pretty ingrained in the town. I like being connected and being involved with what's going on. I don't know if other towns encounter this. Anybody that's interested in looking involved, I think you'll in most reasonably sized towns, you're going to find it shockingly easy. I've never had to run opposed. I've frankly nobody in city councils run opposed in about a decade. It's not something where and it's shockingly difficult to recruit to. You'll see an open seat come up and you're just begging people would be good. And they're like, I don't know. There's particularly with small towns, you have a two-sided problem. When it's small town government, people think it's going to be a real nuisance and a personal problem where you're going to have random strangers coming up to you and hassling you about someone's barking dog or somebody's ugly fence. And it's not like that. And the other side of it is, I think that's particularly for younger people who should be getting more involved now. Millennials and Gen Xers are the people that ought to be running the whole country by now. It's shockingly difficult to get them excited about something that doesn't seem to have national relevance when we're
Mhm.
also focused on Twitter and Facebook. If it isn't some part of national conversation, then what's the point? That everybody in their own head thinks they can picture themselves as a congressman or president of the United States, but head of the hospital district doesn't seem to very much. But it's pretty easy if people decided they want to get involved, and they'll find that it's pretty rewarding because it's so much more direct to what's going on in your life. You're not going to change the planet, but you can actually change neighborhoods pretty near your home pretty fast.
Sure. So what gave you the idea to start going through the ordinances and,
Early on,
focusing on the ones that need to be removed?
again, I didn't have an axe to grind. So I think that my personal style is to learn how things work and why they work one way first before you try and tell everyone how to do their job or how to make the world better.
Sure.
So it was just slowly looking, the way things were working over time and seeing problems as they've been coming up. I think that my main role and council's main role is steering the ship, just seeing that that your town is headed in the right direction, and areas where you're starting to see problems. What's the reason those are coming up, particularly if they're unique to your town. And some of the stuff that I'm focusing on seems to be unique to the flavor of this particular town, which is one of those very box checking towns. Small towns tend to go one of two ways. They're either one where they frankly don't enforce anything at all, and you have people that barely even fill out or inspect, do building inspections or things of that nature, or you have people that absolutely demand every single box be checked before any progress can be made. We're more that direction.
Yeah. So is there like new construction being stifled, progress being stifled because of the bureaucracy and
I
the
think so.
box checking?
I think so. I think there's a significant amount of, you just see a lot of these towns, they go different directions, that the older infrastructure, which, frankly, 1950s towns, that's not old. I mean, we're way more compliant than half the towns on the East Coast if you look at how new the buildings are. But it's a huge detriment. You can have these buildings that are still viable for something, that can still hold something, they're perfectly useful. And it's one by one, you got a town that's turning into a collection of mausoleums because there's nothing that can go into them. And you're waiting for, something to come along and restart and tear stuff down and build it anew. It doesn't generally happen. Usually you got the town you've got to make it work as best you can. There'll be little bits, new buildings and new businesses coming here and there. But if you let whole sections of your town go to pot, it's over. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing right now to fixing these ordinances?
First and foremost, just that they need to be fixed, that there is a genuine sense that these are normal building codes. In extreme circumstances, when you start proposing eliminating superfluous restrictions on what you can build, what you can't, or what businesses can go in and out of a building, you'll say, what kind of town do you really want to have? Do you want to keep all these old crappy buildings, or do you want to really push towards having newer stuff? That's all well and good if you're existing in a time where there's a ton of investment and development going on. But yeah, most of these smaller towns, they're going one of two directions, and Ephrata kind of sits on a dividing line where there's a lot of people moving out of the bigger cities and moving towards lower cost of living places. Other ones, you got some of these real rural towns that are particularly ag based, and they're genuinely aging and dying. Like I think the median age in the US is like 34. If you look to some of these smaller, particularly out in the rural parts of Washington, some of these towns of 1,000 people to 2,000 people, average age gets up to like 55, 65. It's shocking. They're genuinely dying.
Oh, wow.
It's twofold. You got to make sure you're a town that's worth investing in economically, but it's got to be a town where it's worth investing your family in. People want to raise a family here, and the kids want to see opportunities and have reasons to stay or come back if they go off to college or do something else.
Yeah, we dealt with something recently here in Pacific County where I live. We opened up a retail store. We bought a piece of property, and we were operating it for a little over a year. And then we started the process of opening a coffee stand. And when we filed for the permit for the coffee stand, they came back and said, oh no, the entire property is zoned industrial, not retail. You're going to have to close your store. And that was the option they gave us, or to pay $1,100 for a special use permit and then, go through their 3-month process and go through the hearings and environmental impact and traffic impact and pay for all these studies. And we just threw our hands up and said, no, it's fine.
Yeah. And a lot of times, when you go to have anything passing through council, it goes through a definite rigorous review process, and you're looking for an endorsement from your city planner or from the department or your building inspector. You're looking to have something that backs up what your decision is going to be. And it looks bad if you do too much where it's in opposition. If your legal team or whatever says that's a bad idea, that could open up the liability. You look bad passing stuff like that. And there's another libertarian leader in our area over he's a council member over in Moses Lake, which is about 17. He's actually the mayor now, but they had a situation that is similar to what we would encounter here. And I know we would have done the opposite, but they had a coffee shop, just a simple basic coffee shop that opened up on a corner there. And it'd been a successful shop, but they needed a second access point off the street to get traffic coming through. And they were really hoping to have a second spot where they had a window, they could, put a window in on the thing. But the main thing was traffic flow and parking, but they needed it punched through the sidewalk to have another access point. And whoever the city planner says, well, no, officially this, you can't put an intersection within 25 feet of a entrance within 25 feet of a corner, and this would be 19.5 or something like that. And they were absolutely determined, no way, no how. And it's becomes one of those debates of, yeah, but save the coffee shop. The coffee shop people, literally, we're not asking for a handout. Let us just make sure this is a functional coffee shop. Let us keep going. And the council voted, say, yes, give them variance to do what they need to do. We recognize this is not a major intersection town, doesn't represent a whole bunch of stuff, but everybody within the staff was giving the recommendation to the opposite. And the council, after a fair amount of pressure, totally said, no, we're going to override you and give them the variance. They need this, and we want our coffee shop. And I guarantee that just the flavor and culture of my council would be the other way around. There's no way they would go against the guidance of all their department heads and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I helped Don Myers with his campaign back in 2015. Absolutely. And he has worked very hard to help get other like-minded people elected onto his council. I remember when he was the lone voice of reason, if you will, on his council. And then now they have, I believe it's a super majority.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, and that's another thing, running for city council, right? So Don, he's actually coming on the show, I think in a couple of weeks. And, he was able to recruit other people to run for city council there to bring about some sanity and some reason on his city council. What do you recommend for other libertarians looking to get involved at a local level?
I think first thing is to find something you actually care about, because that'll make all the difference. You'll find it's both easier to get involved, easier to get elected than you think. If you try, you'll win. And if it's something that is important to you, you're gonna enjoy the process. It's gonna be something that you value, more than you'll expect. It's never going to demand more time than you can put into this. 90% of the positions that most people go for isn't a career change, and it isn't going to stifle your home life. Most of these things will require 2, 3, 4 meetings a month at most. If you can commit to that, you're good to go. And I think you'll find yourself getting more involved and more effective the more you do it.
Awesome. Yeah. So the time commitment, you're having 2 meetings a month?
You meet bi-weekly, so I think it's that can be the minimum. I mean, if that's all you want, you have to show up for the meetings, and our meetings are relatively short. We have 30 minutes is typical, so it's not a huge time commitment at my level. And I find that towns like this are a real sweet spot in that 5 to 10,000 range. You're going to have most of the function and apparatus of a typical larger city, obviously scaled down dramatically, but you won't have it where your fire chief is also your parks and rec director, and you don't have a budget office. You just have a spreadsheet. Everybody, it isn't like that. If you have a big enough city that it's going to function effectively like that, but it's small enough that it still has accountability. It still doesn't have so many people that nobody knows each other and everybody hates each other, and it's constant infighting and politicking. We have been able to avoid that. You get too much bigger, you get up around 25,000, and there is quite a bit of politics and bureaucracy that is hard to overcome, I know. But yeah, that's what I've found anyway.
Gotcha. So your direction moving forward, right? What are your plans to get some of these ordinances removed?
I'm having more people show up at meetings. We aren't typical of having kind of an open airing of grievances part of our council meetings. That makes it nice. I'm looking to change that entirely, because some councils get stuck for 2 hours as you have the laundry list of pitchfork people that show up to talk. Anybody can speak, but you have to sign up a week in advance what you're wanting to talk about, stuff like that. And that usually just makes it where it's a little simpler. People have to at least have a little more thought out of what they're wanting to do, as opposed to just ranting and raving. But I'm having people come and speak specifically that give a little more visual face to what we're talking about on a lot of these different things. I am definitely prepared to push forward, as I've seen Don do in some of these instances, where I'm ready to have the vote. I'm tired of having this get stuck in. I sent this off to the planning commission, and it never came back. So I guess I know where you stand. I know where I stand. We're going to go ahead and have a discussion on this above your level. That I will start pushing this, at least to make it where it comes to a vote. If I lose the votes, I lose the votes. But I'm not going to have it where they don't come up for votes just because we aren't getting through the message on stuff like this.
Now, do you use Robert's Rules of Order during meetings? Okay, so then you can, you know, put the proposal forward and then move the question.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome.
That just isn't typically how things particularly flow. But once you've reached the roadblock stage, which I'm clearly at with some of this stuff, all right, well, we're going over people's heads. So that may not go over well, but and I pick my battles. I'm not willing to back down, but I don't pick fights. We generally are pretty cordial. Everyone gets along pretty good. So.
Yeah, well, it'll be good for you to actually, you know, draw the line and see where people stand, you know, when it comes to some of these issues. Now, you had named off 3 different ordinances that you were looking to modify. Are there any others?
Sure. There was one on there. Again, I pointed out to them, there is a ordinance that you have to get a permit to be a charity. And so anybody that's out there technically having a car wash or a bake sale, something like that, that's one where you can start turning this around and making them look pretty bad. Saying, look, you want to go enforce this, be my guest. If you guys want to run down to the Girl Scout cookies tent that's out in my parking lot, go right ahead and be my guest. Or the food banks having a fun drive out there, selling old stuff. You want to go, show them in violation of not having their permit for being a charity, which I'm sure it was probably a panhandler law or something that they got passed through once upon a time. That was probably its purpose. I have no idea. It seems odd to me that it's even there, but these are things you can point out to them. If they're going to be the box checkers, you got to start turning that on them and say, look, not everything on this makes sense. You're going to either start getting rid of stuff or I'm going to make you look silly.
So they're not actually enforcing that, but it's just on the books.
Is on the books.
Okay, so you're basically going to, give them the ultimatum, like, hey, you either enforce this or remove it.
Sure, that would be that's the direction I'm going.
Awesome, and that would suck if they started enforcing it.
I don't expect them.
Yeah. Well, cool. Any others?
There's a few other little things. Nothing pops to my head right now. Overall, we've just had, there's always bigger stuff on the agenda. We're working on hiring a new administrator, stuff like that. I think very important and an underestimated area of importance for people that are care about their liberty. In my experience, it's never about the laws. The difference between Houston, Texas, and Guatemala isn't the laws on the table. It's entirely it's the environment, the culture, and the people make things different. And it's a big deal in your town if you've got one of these, a local sheriff or a local police chief who's a real head cracker, who's got way SWAT team in him. It's a big deal that you avoid those people. And it's the same with your staff. When you hire the right people, they hire the right people. I've been very adamant that my town is not going to be a place where you're having no-knock raids over someone's drug investigation in the middle of the night. I see those as a massive public safety hazard, if not a civil liberty. I want absolutely no police dogs or the walking four-legged judges, as most people call them. Those again, another huge liability. If you look at some of the studies on that, like over the half of the people that get hospitalized as a result of some sort of police interaction because of dogs. We don't talk about that, but dogs are really unpredictable. I appreciate that the police see them as a tool. I see them as a huge lawsuit and a civil rights violation in most cases. So stuff like that you can avoid at the front end of that by being involved with the people getting hired in your town. If you have people that care about liberty, if you have people that care about the Constitution and don't just pay lip serve, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up. So you have actual influence over the type of people who get hired on the staff.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can find yourself, definitely raising your hand a lot, saying, hey, I want to be on the search committee for that guy, or I'd like to be on whatever panels interviewing officers. And you can start seeing a big difference, whether you're talking to, you're bringing in an Andy Mayberry or a Sonny Crockett, into your team. It's a big difference.
Gotcha. So what advice do you have for other libertarians that are looking to get involved? Is there do you just go to city council meetings, just start attending?
I think open your eyes to the number of potential possibilities. Don't get hung up on titles or things of, that are overly ego boosting, because that's not what this is about. But you think back on the areas that like over the last couple of years, how big a deal if we'd have had libertarians littered across the hospital districts the last few years? What kind of
Oh
difference
yeah.
what kind of difference would that make if you had libertarians just sprinkled all throughout all the school boards across the country? That'd make a big difference. It changes a lot of policy and direction and the culture and flavor of these institutions that have a huge part of our lives. I think that's the biggest thing that people underestimate is, while we put all the importance on the federal level on all the big titles and stuff like that, the vast majority of what you care about is very close to home. And you can see that not just with the laws and the law enforcement, you can see it with the like budgets and stuff like that. Like if you look at what people actually care about for their, when you ask what you want government to do, most people, you're going to talk about, you know, the police, the fire, the roads, the sewer, the water, that sort of stuff. That's all local. Schools, that's
Mhm.
all that stuff is actually local. The federal government for the most part is a giant self-inflated fluff piece, and it is self-inflated. If you want to win over a liberal to libertarian stuff, at least on our as we attack kind of at the federal level, point out to them that despite all those things that matter so close to home, if you add up all the municipal budgets, the cities, the counties, the states combined, it's like half what the federal spend. What
Yeah.
do you get? You know, if you want more money for your schools, if that's what's important to you, if that's your key issue, or more money for healthcare or something like that, get it out of there. They spend it on themselves. It goes, none of that genuinely trickles down, you know, in any effective way. It's pennies on the dollar actually reach the local level.
Yep.
So it's a big deal. And I think that it's also a winning recipe for libertarians in general. We need to have the opposite focus of the two big parties because they are so top down that they've left themselves completely vulnerable from attack from the bottom up, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I'm hoping that this interview will inspire a lot of libertarians to run at the local level. So we've got another local election coming up next year.
Cool.
Awesome. One more question for you.
Sure.
In your own words, what makes someone a leader?
I've always said that leadership's like beauty. It's hard to describe, but you know when you see it, and it comes in lots of different flavors. I think that you know, easiest ones to recognize are the alpha dog, natural born leaders, and everybody just naturally gravitates around them. And that's not who I am. I'm generally more of a lead by example type person, and you know, surprisingly effective too. If you're a person that people like working with, working for, or you're a person that's just naturally a good part of a team, you're going to grow a good team around you. And that's a pretty good way to lead as well, as opposed to just a person who naturally galvanizes and gathers, you know, sheep around them. You can be a person competent people like to be around because they know they can depend on you, that you're knows what they're talking about, or if you don't have an answer, you're a person that knows how to find it or knows the people that do. That's a pretty effective leader.
Awesome. That's a great answer. And I really appreciate what you're doing. Most politicians, they are working to get elected so they can increase the amount of laws on the books. And, you know, I've said it for a while since I got involved back in 2011, is that there's going to be a time when there's more people running for office trying to repeal these bad laws than to add. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And I am going to be following you even more closely now. So hopefully I'll have you back after you have some more successes.
I'd be happy to.
All right. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Libertarian Leadership Academy podcast. If you are considering running for office, maybe you already have ran for office, you're looking to run again, go over to libertarianleadership.org, sign up for a free 30-minute coaching session. I'm going to get you started on the right path. I'll get you a copy of our campaign success workbook and put you in the right direction. Definitely do this for yourself and for your campaign. I promise, I guarantee that you will be much better off launching your campaign with this help. Also, if you are a user of CBD products, please go support our company, Packcrest Botanicals. You could use discount code LLA at the website packcrestbotanicals.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.